What's the good word, Josh? Your boy DKB here. We are officially going on day 14 of training camp, and it's crazy to think we're a couple of weeks away from the regular season. But to dive into some of our housekeeping items here, Mike Williams, our free agent star wide receiver acquisition, he spoke today or yesterday anyways, and he mentioned that he feels really, really good. His body has been taken to the rehab process pretty well. He's been ahead of schedule as far as we can tell since when they've activated him, and he looks like he's ready to be back, in his words, by next week, right? So this will put us just outside of the Giants game, and then we'll have our 2-week prep period before we get ready for the 49ers, and with it being a Monday night game, he'll get that additional day of rest as well. So I'm pumped to hear that news first and foremost, right? I've been itching to see what a practice session with Mike Williams will look like. Now, we'll probably have limited information outside of whatever press conferences and stuff that comes up, but we know that Mike Williams has been in tune with Rodgers and stuff via headset, via just walking around and being a part of individual drills, picking his brain, as he's mentioned, for where he would like him to see how he's throwing the ball. But ultimately, for the lack of practices so far, he's mentioned he just plans on adjusting as necessary to what Rodgers is requesting, considering he's getting passes thrown to him from a Hall of Famer. So I can't wait to see what that looks like versus the 49ers for the first time, having a significant weapon across from Garrett Wilson to help him out, and then having the monster that is Brees and the killer bees in the backfield to really help round things out. So hopefully we have a good showing. With that said, if this practice is an indication of our preparedness for week 1, we're in for some heartbreak. This was by far the worst practice for the offense of the offseason by all accounts, right? So I want to get into the on-field work. Let's talk about who's here and who's absent real quick. But just know that this was a practice for the offense that was pretty much marred by miscommunications, inaccuracy, self-inflicted wounds, drops, turnovers. Pretty much anything that you could fathom negative for an offense did occur here. But we did at least get Rodgers demanding some additional reps towards the end of practice to try to end on a high note. That didn't end up being the case, but nonetheless, we did get some updates about guys that are officially going to be shut down for training camp. Now, this will be interesting because some of the names don't have a surefire roster spot locked down, so we'll have to see if they've done enough throughout the course of training camp and OTAs and such for the Jets to make some surprise moves in some of these cases, right? Jarek Bernard Converse is going to be out for training camp. He's dealing with a groin. Isaiah Oliver will be out for training camp. His injury is unknown. It doesn't seem like it's a personal thing. Otherwise, I'm sure that would have been highlighted. Lecky Fotu will be out for training camp. He's dealing with a hammy. And then Michael Carter II, on a positive note, was upgraded to day-to-day. He's still coming back from his ankle. There's really no reason to rush him. He wasn't going to be in any preseason games. And while it'd be helpful to probably have him out there for joint practices, we know what our cornerback trio looks like. Irv Charles is also out. He's dealing with a hip, but according to Saleh, he's expected to be back as early as Tuesday, maybe Wednesday at the latest for the joint practices with the Giants. And then we have some returns. Jeremy Ruckert is working his way back from concussion protocol. He was in a red jersey. And then guard Jacob Hansen is also returning to the field to try to add to that guard competition. So in terms of on-field work, this was interesting because it's one of the first times you can directly point to Aaron Rodgers and say he was one of the major problems with the offense. Now, in his case, right, inaccurate throws all day. There were a bunch of miscommunications, as mentioned. I've seen Sabo and a couple other guys highlight the fact that they didn't know who he was throwing to in some cases. And then a lot of it, going back and taking a look at some accounts, was the fact that when Aaron Rodgers spotted something within the coverage and where he wanted to attack or where he was trying to pinpoint the ball anyways, his receiver didn't happen to notice, pick up, or respond in the same fashion, right? So if you have a guy that you're expecting to break in and he kind of breaks out or he stops, anything of the sort, right, it can look like your pass is going to sail. So when I say inaccurate, know that to the highest degree, right? You're talking about maybe a ball being too low as opposed to being spot on in the numbers. We're not dealing with, Christian Hackenberg passes going into the stands, hitting cameramen or nothing like that. But still, worrisome enough, especially for the haters out there that would love to point out Aaron Rodgers is extremely old and he was on the downside of his career, and regardless of injuries, he isn't who everybody has grown accustomed to him being, right? So, with that said, he did have an impressive throw that I was able to pull out from this terrible day. Darted a side throw, a little baseball shimmy, if you will, to Garrett Wilson, just getting past CJ Mosley. But ultimately, he finished 11 of 27 on the day, had an interception to go with that. And at one point, there was a series of 7 plays where he had 5 incompletions. The other one was a sack. And then I believe the other one was a turnover. So, shades of 2022 season, right? This is one of those ones where the biggest takeaway is Rodgers is going to have to figure out a way to dial in with some of his weapons and make sure that they're thinking the same when it comes to breakdowns in the defense or certain things that he's highlighting, right? Other than that, this is one of those things where you just kind of have to scrap the day and get back to it. With that said, though, there were still some highlights and things, right? Obviously, most of it would be defensively, but Kenny Yeboah did have himself a great falling catch from Rodgers to kick off practice, right? And for what it's worth, Aaron Rodgers started practice 5 of 6 before things really went off the rails. But outside of that, not a lot of greatness, right? I think the run game was still strong from the bits and pieces I was able to pick up on. But wholesalely, again, something to scrap for the offense. Defensively, you had Tony Adams. He was the recipient of the rare interception from Aaron Rodgers. This one actually counted. He got himself a red zone interception to end practice. And again, this was after Aaron Rodgers, pretty much begged Saleh to extend it a little longer to try to work out some kinks. Will McDonald had himself a day. 2 sacks. He's been coming on really, really strong with a lot of this stuff. It's interesting hearing the 2 sacks, right? And when you think about Takk McKinley's 3 sack days that he was having, Robert Saleh mentioned that he's only counting sacks when it's extremely obvious. So these were clear wins for Will McDonald, and at this point, I think he's had himself at least a sack every practice the last 3 or 4 practices. And then obviously coming off a strong preseason game as well, where I think he had the second highest edge grade of the week 2 preseason game, something along those lines. So things are moving up in a significant way for Will McDonald. DJ Reed had himself a pass breakup versus Lance McCutcheon. Ashton Davis was able to punch a ball out of Jason Brownlee's hands, and at this point, Jason Brownlee's stock is up in the air, if you ask me. But I will save that for a depth chart breakdown video at some point. CJ Mosley had himself a nice pass breakup versus Rodgers, and then Jamian Sherwood has been popping up pretty often and in a significant way throughout the course of training camp. Today, he laid the hammer on Israel Abanikanda, and the hit was strong enough to almost start a skirmish during practice. Little chatter before things ended up simmering down, but I love it, right? At this point, I talked before about the unknown battle between Ashton Davis and Jamian Sherwood for snaps, essentially, right? Ashton Davis is the 3rd safety in rotation if we want to do 3 safety combo packages, different things of that nature. And then ultimately that impacts Jamian Sherwood. If Ashton Davis is on the field, those are snaps that are going to be taken away from Sherwood, as we love to run a 2 linebacker alignment. So if he's finding a way to see the field more often, it's not necessarily a great thing for Ashton Davis, and vice versa, right? But I love it. The competition seems to be fairly strong, and if the preseason game was any indicator, Claudin Chairless, one of our former LBs, having a strong game, but ultimately the linebackers as a whole having a really solid day. The Jets will be just fine, right? Our linebacking core seems to be highlighted pretty much across the league when you look at former cast-offs that are doing some big things. So nonetheless, let me know what you guys think about this training camp practice. Is this a sign of things to come for week 1, or is this just a blip on the radar? And I'll catch you guys again. Peace.